recap. We'll do a quick overview of the Career Center. We'll have Spartan Setups introduce their student club, and then we'll go into the eSports panel. We'll have some time for the wider panel Q&A, and then we'll have some opportunities for you all to do small group networking sessions. So we've actually updated this. It's going to be 3 rounds of 15 minutes so that you can meet and greet with more of the folks that are here today. And then after the networking time, we're going to do closing and have you complete our event survey. Just a couple of rules for today's event. Please make sure that you complete that Google form. My colleague Edlin is on the back end helping to monitor the chat. So keep an eye out for that if you haven't already completed that form. And that's just for us to know that you actually attended the event live today. If you could kindly keep your audio and video on mute. We set this meeting up as a meeting so that you are able to do the networking portion in the breakout rooms. But until we get to that point, I'm just going to ask you all to kindly keep your audio and video muted. And then if you have questions for any of the folks that you see speaking today, please use the chat and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And when we have the audience Q&A time, we'll address as many of those as we can. All right, so I'm actually going to pass it over to Amit to introduce Spartan Setups.
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Amit Jogia, and I'm a junior business management student, and I'm the president of Spartan Setups. And basically what Spartan Setups is, it's a personal hobbies club that focuses on student interests, whether that being personal setups, technology, gaming, or esports. And we basically like help collaborate with different types of panels for students to learn about gaming and esports. And like our socials are right there. And our upcoming panel, which will be on September 17th, which is a Friday at 4 p.m., we'll be having someone from TikTok who's created a big brand for himself around the custom keyboard game. And he'll be talking about how he created his own small custom keyboard business. If you want to like learn more about us, I'm going to be putting our Discord in the chat. So feel free to join that. If you have any questions there, you can definitely chat it up in general. And yeah, look forward to chatting with y'all if you join the server. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So Spartan Setups is one of the sponsors for today's event. So highly encourage you all to check them out and connect with them. Other information that you might want to have in mind for the SHU Career Center. This is one of many different types of events and workshops and employer connections that we offer. I highly encourage you, if you haven't already bookmarked our website, that is the best way to stay up to date with all of the career events and connections and resources that we have available for you as students. Just to highlight a couple upcoming events.
What is up?
So just a reminder, if you could please stay on mute. Thank you very much. So a couple upcoming events, our STEM virtual job and internship fair is coming up on the 22nd. We also have our business fair coming up on the 28th. So if you are actively searching for opportunities, those are definitely events that you want to have on your radar. If you're looking for just continuing to network, maybe meeting other professionals and leaders, I would highly encourage you to check out SHU Squared, which is our mentorship platform, where we connect with alumni and other professionals who are willing to share career tips and advice with students, as well as our leadership conference, which we invite alumni and leaders in their field and professions to come back and share their stories and journeys with you all. So some other great networking events that are coming up that I would encourage you all to check out. All right, so at this point, I am going to invite Che, Layla, Catherine, and Ashley to go ahead and turn their videos on. And let's see. All right, thank you. See you guys coming on. All right, awesome. I think I got everyone. So I'm gonna have you guys briefly introduce yourselves on to the students a little bit about who you are, what you do. Students, if you want to take a quick snap of this screen so you remember who everyone is and what they do, I would encourage you to do that. And this is the intros. So I'm going to have you guys go through, say your name, maybe a little bit about what you studied in college, your current job title, and a little bit about what you currently do. So Che, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. You're muted, Che. Zoom of the year, right?
After all these years of using Zoom like, through the pandemic,
I know.
I'm still
It's a keyword of the year, right?
Hey everyone, I'm Che. Happy to be here, honored to be here. I actually went to San Jose State many years ago, so very interesting to be back speaking to a whole new generation of professionals. I'm Senior Director of eSports for Ubisoft North America, which means that I oversee both the broadcast production, tournament operations, as well as the business side of esports for Ubisoft, this side of the world. I have a counterpart in Europe who also manages that region. If you guys follow Ubisoft esports, you know that our primary focus right now is Rainbow Six esports. And so obviously a lot of my attention is focused on the North American League for Rainbow Six. My major, I was an English major, actually, a humanities major at San Jose State. So nothing to do with engineering. I know that a lot of engineers signed up to listen to this panel, but no, I came from the humanities. And in fact, I got into gaming as a writer. So anyway, happy to be here.
Awesome. And thank you for shouting out to our non-technical majors, because there are some of those folks that are in the room today. So it's very probably hopefully inspiring to kind of hear your story and journey. All right, Layla, I'm going to pass it to you next for introduction.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Layla. I'm currently an associate producer on X Defiant for Ubisoft, based out of our San Francisco studio. But I actually started at Ubisoft working on the promotions and partnerships team. And in other words, I was actually working really closely with Che's team on esports. I used to sell esports sponsorships, which was a really interesting way to get into the world of esports. But right now, my responsibilities as an associate producer are anything from scheduling, task management, load balancing, to some really big picture things like, planning for a year after release. What are things going to be like? How are our teams going to look? I don't handle too much budgeting personally, but that is a big part of the production pipeline as well. And just a lot of people management, making sure to help people solve problems, being a catalyst for change where you need to be, which is really interesting and one of my favorite parts of the job. With regards to major, I actually majored in theater and media studies, so even a little bit more left field. But I think, as Che mentioned, there's so much to be brought from kind of a humanities standpoint, especially if the job you're doing doesn't directly involve any of the coding or engineering. There's so many other entrances to the video gaming space.
Awesome. Thank you, Layla, for sharing that as well. And also kind of your journey, right? How you transition between different roles. And I'm sure that'll probably come up more in some of your answers to the future questions. Catherine, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. I graduated in business administration in Montreal, Canada. So I started at Ubisoft as a e-commerce marketing assistant, and now I'm an esports specialist, but we can translate it as a marketing manager. Basically, I can describe my position in like three main tasks. So mainly content creation, for any new program, mainly for the NAL or the content series that we do or big announcement. I'd also market analysis, always monitoring what the competition is doing. And lastly, project and brand management as well. So by making sure that we have good processes in place in order to work smoothly with all the cross-functional teams that we have internally. And also I'm responsible for briefing our creative agency for any assets requests that we do on big projects, while ensuring that it's always cohesive with our brand image. So yeah, that sums it up.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing kind of a little bit more about your role and what you do. It sounds like you touch lots of different areas as well. So probably lots of things that maybe students, I want you to start thinking about, maybe things that you may have questions about. Ashley, I see you. Go ahead.
So hi, yes, I'm Ashley Swisher. I'm on the HR side and based out of San Francisco as well, and support both the San Francisco business office, the San Francisco studio that Layla's a part of, as well as the Montreal business office that Catherine is within. And then we also have a team in North Carolina that is our customer resource center, like a player direct interface for support and work with them as well. When I was at school, I majored in business with a specialty in hospitality management. So I know the San Jose State program well. So I did not go to San Jose State, but very similarly ended up in gaming through a very different non-traditional background. But my role is all things HR project management. So making sure that we're able to be agile and add in new programs, but also a lot of the outreach with universities.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. And just a reminder for students, if you could kindly keep yourselves muted and your videos off, we will have time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please put those in the chat and we'll be monitoring those so that we can ask them during the audience Q&A portion. All right, so thank you all for introducing yourself. The first panel question that we have is, what is the work environment in esports gaming like? Do all employees work with the esports players or just some? What does it kind of look like in your different respective offices?
I can go first if you want, Trey, and you can follow up. For me, I'd say, well, first of all, with the first question, I'd say the work environment in esports is very fast-paced, not only because our game is, if you know already, Rainbow Six Siege, it's a very complex game. You have to know the operator skills and the action moves very quickly. But it's also because the community and the events are as well. For example, after each stage in the North American League, we have a transfer window where the players can change teams. So this affects our contents as well. So it's always a moving pace that we have. And it's always very interesting to create content around that. And I like to say that esports never sleeps because basically we have 4 regions that happens all at once with the competition. So we have to plan content for like every month and also including other programs. So it can be for weekly tournaments that we have for the community. And also, for example, our collegiate program, wanted to give a little shout out. I know you had the Spartan teams, I believe the esports team at the university. So by the way, we have registrations open until October 10th if you're interested. But yeah, basically, I'm quite new into the esports world and it's always very interesting, moving always quickly. Unfortunately, due to COVID, I couldn't attend an event in person yet, but I feel like we're able to make it engaging, even with people being from home watching. And so, yeah, I'm always learning something new every day based on everything happening very quickly. And then regarding the players relationship, personally, I work more with the team's brand and their content manager, or with our agency that will go and produce the content directly with the players. But it did happen sometimes that the players will reach out for questions, or we'll have to coordinate with them to capture content or for special requests, for example. But this is more on our league's operations to team to handle. And yeah, so it's always interesting to work with them. And of course, there are some players and teams that are easier to work with, but it's not any different than any other workplace. So at the end of the day, it's really nice to see how we can all be collaborative for all parties involved and create awesome things for the league.
Hey, Larissa, I can also jump in. Thank you, Catherine. Catherine actually works on my team, and so the first thing I want to say is like her role as a esports specialist. It's a very generic title, but she really is esports marketing manager. And esports marketing, I would say, is like it's not really quite a science yet. It's very new. You know, and esports is evolving, right? Like it's evolving from like traditional like tournaments and competitions into more influencer-based economies. So esports marketing is also evolving and it changes all the time. So I think Catherine is really on the cutting edge of basically trying to figure out how do we, how do we engage eyeballs and how do we get people hyped on content. So it's a very interesting role. And she's also right that the current work environment in esports is all work from home. You know, at Ubisoft, it's everyone's work from home. And what we've learned over the last couple of years is through the pandemic is that we can basically execute esports remotely anywhere, and it's a really interesting kind of work challenge where you have to set up broadcasts and you have to set up production and set up tournaments, but most of it can be done remotely. And so so today, yes, like all of my team they all work. Catherine's in Montreal. I have folks in the Bay Area as well as in LA, and everyone's remote, and yet we can pull off these huge productions. And so I think what I think the esports environment is going to become in like the near future is I think it's going to be very flexible because there's just no excuse you don't have to go and sit somewhere as as sort of a traditional team, but you can still get a lot done. That said, I think we all really miss the camaraderie that we had as a team, even when we were separated across countries or the coasts. We would often go to Montreal or they would come to San Francisco. And so I think that is the missing piece that I think that the pandemic has brought. So, but I mean, overall, I think because you can do esports anywhere and because it's so flexible, we always, I have to look out for burnout because Catherine's also right, like esports sort of never sleeps. First of all, we have a global league, so there's competitions going on at all hours, literally like 3 a.m. there's a competition in Asia. So, sometimes when there's a urgent situation, like you're on call all the time. So, I think that's definitely something to keep in mind when you want to come into esports. It's a very fluid environment. It's very fast moving, very fluid. And there's a lot of dependencies on ecosystem actors. And so pro teams, pro players, investors, sponsors, partners, they all have to work together. And so, but the beautiful thing is that it's all very new. It's still very new, even though it's been around for just over a decade. I think it's still being figured out. So I think it's very exciting. And then do we all work with players? Sometimes I think, when it depends, like in my role as senior director, I'm like very hands off on the day-to-day production of the broadcast or the events. But if I were a producer on the actual project, then yeah, like wrangling players, getting them to basically get all of it organized, coordinated so that we can capture their likeness, create content around them, so get materials for the broadcast. All of that is working with players, and as like players are influencers, and influencers are all very interesting. Like they're all personalities, right? So so it's I think it's a very interesting job, to be honest. It's you see all types, and yeah, we do work directly with players and teams quite a bit.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about what the environment looks like and kind of sharing a little bit more about like the workflow and how those collaborations happen. So the next question that I have is, what would you recommend for students that are trying to break in? We hear a lot that it's super competitive, that there aren't a lot of opportunities. So what are some maybe tips and advice that you guys would recommend for students that are fresh, just trying to get into the industry?
Jump in to start with this one, and then definitely we'll let the others who are much more embedded in the teams speak to it specific to their roles. But I mean, as you can kind of tell from all four of us, I think that coming out of university, we didn't necessarily like have the gaming resume. I mean, that is something that you can go to school for, but it's still pretty limited. So I wouldn't say that that is a requirement by any means. It's absolutely a very competitive industry. So that is something to, I'd say, not let discourage you, because particularly for entry-level roles, for internships, we get hundreds of applicants. So sometimes it is a numbers game, which is, I think, can be very hard to hear from a student's perspective, but also realistically, it's not always about you individually. So it really is about setting yourself apart and breaking into an industry. One of the roles that I see a lot of people able to get their footing, if you're looking to go into more of the game development side, is as a development tester. And that's something that I'm sure Layla could probably speak to with a little bit more accuracy than me, but that is one of the entry level, sometimes contract roles as a game is getting closer to launch, that you're, checking for how the game is running once it's been built. And then from a like business and direct player and customer interaction side, the player support positions that, like I mentioned, currently are based out of our North Carolina office. It's another that's a really, really good entry point, because there's a lot of seasonal hiring that happens for the kind of main peaks in our year. So those can sometimes be summer positions or junior roles to be able to get your foot in the door and gain experience within a gaming company. But I'll defer. Those are the two that I always like to kind of plug as some of the roles that people don't think of because they don't have the term internship in their title.
Yeah, I think, Ashley, you have a great point. I think there are two sort of ways that I would see going into the industry. The first one is if you know exactly what you want to do and you feel like you are not finding those jobs in gaming. A lot of the times when people ask for experience, they ask for, 2, 3, 5 years, but they don't usually specify in the gaming industry. And so if you have that role open in another industry or another sector that you are interested in, that is a great place to kind of develop that professional experience that you can't get without a job, without having to just sit and wait for the perfect role in gaming to come in. And it's actually relatively simple to transfer a lot of your skills, especially if you're doing the same role, just in a different industry. And you really have that backing and that professional experience once you've done it a couple of years, that I would really recommend. The other option is if you're maybe a little bit more open to a lot of different roles, or if you're not quite sure what you're interested in, kind of like what Ashley is saying, there's a lot of entries into the gaming industry that then lead to kind of wherever you want to go. There's not too many really linear, there's not too many really linear career paths in gaming. You can kind of move around. I've been really lucky to move even from marketing into the production side. So I think especially somewhere like Ubisoft, we really appreciate like lateral movement and people developing new interests and developing new skills on the job and realizing I spent a lot of time in marketing and now I'm really interested in PR. And you can bring both external skills and also a lot of people or soft skills into that. So you could start, like Ashley said, as a development tester and then end up as a designer. You could end up as an engineer. You could end up in production. We see that come really often. But really, as long as you can find a way to enter the space, there's a lot of ways for you to eventually make it to your career of choice, even if you don't start there. And it's usually very encouraging to go on that journey.
Great, thanks for sharing. I love kind of like the example kind of like tips and advice that you guys are giving for, maybe exploring some of those roles that are maybe not as, clearly marked as internships that are going to still kind of get you your foot in the door, and just to be flexible and be willing to, try out different things and learn and continue to grow.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that in terms of jobs in esports specifically, I mean, this applies to all gaming, but I think like esports, there's probably this conception, sort of belief that like you have to know esports first of all, and also it's like you have to be good at games, or you have to be a kind of esports person to get into esports. And I think that like what I like qualities I look for in a person on the team, the last thing I look for is like how much they know how to play a game or how much they watch an esport. I think it is like, hey, are you a great graphic designer? Then great. Like we need a great graphic designer who can see, a vision and etc. So I think that my point is there's a bunch of different things to do in esports, because it's like every other industry that like we need writers, or we need like people who are capable of like storytelling, right? Like for broadcast, we need graphic designers, we need community managers, so it runs the gamut. Same with the game industry. So I think my advice would be, regardless of what your specialty is, I guess, your trade, if you have a passion, like if you're interested in esports or you want to get into that industry, like think about what your trade is and how you should apply it, because I think you don't necessarily have to just like scrap everything you've learned. And also the thing is, there are a lot of entry level positions, and I think a lot of them pay really badly, but you have to first make sure that you are getting paid. I think there's also a lot of like just bad actors where they don't pay, and so you should get compensated for your work, but you should see it as a lot of the payment that you get is just experience, right? I think because a lot of this stuff you can't learn in a book, and you have to learn on the job, especially with production, and you're dealing with real-time issues that come up, and then you basically learn how to deal with them, and then you have that experience. So I would say like go for these entry-level positions and just like learn the heck out of like the job on the job. Get paid for your time, but like get exposure. And I think that that's really how I've seen a lot of people come in, including people on my team, come in and then go on to do really impressive things, because I'm like they basically become from junior people to like indispensable people, and that's kind of what you want to become, right? You want to go in, you want to pick up a bunch of skills, and then at some point become indispensable on the team. And then at that point they're like, oh well, please don't go to my competitor, and now you have the option. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. I think we have 2 more preset questions left, and then we have some time for a few questions from the audience. So I'm hoping that we can keep these next 2 brief, because there will also be networking time where students, you'll be able to meet with all of the panelists one-on-one if you would like to participate in that. So if I could have just maybe 1 or 2 for each of the remaining questions answered. And then students, just a reminder, please keep yourselves on mute. Thank you. That way we can continue to move along. All right, so the next question that we have was, what positions do you think have or will have in the future the most need in esports and gaming? So what are some of the areas of growth that maybe students that are trying to break in, that they might want to consider building their skills in or getting exposure to, so that they're well positioned?
I'm just going to jump in really quick because I just have a really quick answer, but UI engineers and UI designers. We're always looking for some, especially people that are kind of coming out of the tech world, coming into the more creative space of gaming. So if you have an interest in UI, I would really pursue that.
Awesome.
I can add quickly, like you mentioned earlier, about more like storytelling and graphic design as well. For me, I feel like creative position, I think, are the ones who get the most need. Just for example, if the first thing you think of when I say 100 Thieves, I'm sure you're thinking of like their branding, their merch, their content creators. So esports for me is for sure based on the competition for sure, but also more and more getting about lifestyle and about those who stand out and create while respecting their brand consistency. So it can be either content creation, graphic design, cinematography, or just a passion for the storytelling, because people want to know more on storylines from their favorite players. And really, these are positions I feel like that are able to transcript those stories and have the power to share them properly. Just for example, also, if you think about the series on Netflix, Drive to Survive, some people who had no interest in F1 now have the interest to understand what's going on and what will the drivers go through, etc. So it's just example like that you can share a storyline, just being a good storyteller and being able to really translate what players go through in esports.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. And I see a lot of questions coming in on the chat too. So if folks, if my panelists do have some tips and advice for those before we get to the Q&A, feel free to respond to those as well.
I'll give a shout out for some positions that I think will be really vital in the days to come for esports. Well, one, I think if you're a software engineer, I think you're always in demand. On the esports side, software engineers are typically developing community tools like websites that display information like stats and things like that. There's so it's less about obviously developing the game, but I think more importantly, we have a lot of need for data scientists to basically understand our KPIs and let's say, hey, let's do some analysis around viewership, and because we have to try to get a sponsor and they want to understand how our viewers are trending and who's watching and why, etc. I think data scientists are super important because it's basically how we position our strategy based on their data points, so or their insights. And so data scientists, and then also a huge need for biz devs. All the partnerships that you see, all the sponsorships, all the partnerships that are between companies, those all require business developers to basically connect the dots and get the ink on the paper. So these deals are the lifeblood of esports, sponsorship money, etc. So so get that MBA, biz dev is huge in esports.
Awesome. And I love that you guys are sharing some of the kind of maybe, pathways that don't necessarily always kind of come to mind when folks think of esports. So for students, I see a lot of questions in the chat of what does my major equate to? I would encourage you to think about your skills and your strengths and what you do well, and then just look at different positions. You don't necessarily have to go directly into esports. It's a business just like any other company, right? So any kind of business skills that you see and just your general companies, they're probably going to have a need for that in the esports space as well. So really just kind of reflecting on, what are things that you want to do? What do you like to do? What do you do well? And then trying to figure out what, different pathways that might map with in the industry. All right, so this is my final question for the panelists, and then I believe we'll turn it over for a few Q&A questions. I know we're a little bit behind time, so we might switch up the networking portion a little bit, but we'll do the best that we can so you guys can actually have some time to do smaller groups and meet and greets with the panelists that you would like to meet. So the last question is, what are the important skills, qualifications you look for in strong candidates? And what are some of the things that students should be learning if they want to be seen as a competitive candidate? I think you guys have kind of touched on this a little bit in some of your roles, but if there's anything extra that you want to add, please do so at this time.
I can jump in real quick, just more like on a digital marketing perspective. Like we mentioned all of those earlier, but I think analytical skills is always a great skill to have, of course. And with the knowledge of like the tracking social, the branding, and the community metrics, those are all very important, at least in my department. And also, for sure, knowledge of like social platforms, including having innovative ideas that would suit well the audience that we're aiming. And overall, I'll just say it's always important for sure to have excellent communication and organization skills, collaboration skills for sure. In esports, we're all working together to make sure we promote a great league. And also to work with our internal partners as well as third-party agencies. And for sure, if you have interest in SEO and influencer marketing, those are always great to have. And I'll end that on just saying that even though sometimes you don't have all the skills or qualifications that are on a job description, just don't hesitate. Send your CV and cover letters anyway, and you might be the perfect fit if you don't take the chance. So, and worst case scenario, it will be just a no. So yeah.
I think also in gaming, I mean, I won't speak for Ashley because she's our official recruiter, but what I've seen in gaming is, and for myself personally too, is that it's okay to be self-made and it's okay to be scrappy because, you know, there's nothing more important than experience. And if you have the experience, it really doesn't matter what your pedigree is, I guess. And not to say that you shouldn't get your degree, but I think don't worry so much about what your degree is. Like, you know, I got an English degree and I actually was like, okay, I'm going to try to be a writer. And my path into the game industry was like, I was a game writer. I was a game journalist. Right? So I used my writing skills to write about games. Like this was like 20 years ago. But you know, and so that's how I learned about the industry. And then that's how I was able to then make the transition. In 2006, I went from being a journalist to working at Microsoft as a community manager because I understood the community that read my pieces and I understood gamers. And so I went there. And so it's kind of like, I think if you apply yourself and you're just like a smart person, you know, just go after what you want in life. And then once you get some of the experience, I think then that's your momentum. And I think that's what good hiring managers will look for more is that, hey, you know, what initiatives have you taken? What experience do you have? And I think there's a lot of like X number of years that are required. I think it's more about what you've accomplished, you know, in that time. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that speaks to a lot of the questions that were in the chat about like, what can I do with this particular major? What types of careers should I pursue? And it's really not necessarily about your studies, but as far as like the skills that you are willing to build or have and how those kind of map onto specific pathways in your industry of interest. So those were the preset questions that we have. I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat and it looks like, you know, a lot of those have been answered by our panelists as we've been going through. So thank you guys for keeping an eye on that. I do want to address, you know, at least one or two questions from the chat as a broad group. So let me just take a look and see what might be good for you guys to answer that we maybe haven't talked about. So there's a question about data analyst and if that would be considered the most needed position in esports and gaming. So I think maybe Che, you were the one that was talking a little bit about that. So if maybe you can maybe expand on that a little bit more.
Sure. We have on the esports side, we definitely have a need for data scientists in two ways. One is so in two ways. One is we have a need to analyze viewership. Like we have, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions of views on our broadcast, and how, like who these viewers are, what their viewing habits are, and then also understanding kind of once they watch an esports broadcast, where do they go in our ecosystem from there? You know, who are they as Ubisoft players? I think that's all data science, because audience insights is basically how we derive strategy for our products, right? So without audience insights, I think we're kind of operating in the dark. So to me, data scientists are in this current climate, like of, you know, online viewership and audience retention, essentially, you know, acquisition retention. I think data scientists are like super key to running a live operation. So I don't know if it's the most important. I would say it's very, very critical right now.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think a lot of businesses, you know, are looking to data to help them figure out where to go and where is their most efficient kind of like time and money spent. So definitely, if you are a fan of working with information and data and coming up with, you know, ways to efficiently organize that and make it actionable, and I'm sure not only in esports, but across many industries, that is highly desirable right now. I see one more question, which is, what do you see as some of the major issues or trends in your field?
I mean, I guess that I won't speak to all of game. I mean, gaming is a pretty big field, so I'll speak to esports in particular. I think right now, to me, the biggest issue is probably COVID. You know, I think that unfortunately, I mean, it is what it is. Like, I think we're fortunate that while COVID for 18 plus months shut down live events, you know, like people gathering at stadiums to watch things, and all that fanfare that we used to get with esports, we were able to pivot very quickly to online productions, you know, and players could play from home. We could do broadcast productions from home. Like, I think esports learned very quickly to adapt. That said, I think that I don't think we're out of the woods in terms of, it's like, yes, we can do a production, but now I think that with COVID, business parameters will change. You know, I think viewership is going to be different. People's time and how they're spending it, you know, and what they're watching is different with the pandemic now. So you're just competing with more online content in general everywhere. And so I think it's esports is at an interesting point if you think about it. Like, it was traditionally based on kind of a sports model, which is, hey, we have this competition, we're going to monetize through advertising and sponsorships, which is fine, and that's still the primary way that you know, publishers like Ubisoft recoup our esports investments. But I think increasingly what you're starting to see is like influencers and single content creators can amass tons of viewers and followers without the need of any competition, right? So like, so essentially, like, you know, I think esports is slowly evolving to become more influencer driven, and you know, and I think it's not a bad thing. It's you know, sports is influencer driven, right? In some ways, a lot of the personalities that stand out, and they're the ones that people talk about. So I think esports is going through a natural evolution, but I do think that natural evolution is going to impact business. And what I see today is that monetization of viewership is probably going to change over the next year. I think it's just in terms of like valuation and things like that.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting kind of like look at, you know, where the industry is now and kind of where things are going. I think, you know, it's just kind of common in most industries. COVID has kind of upended a lot of things. Even in education, we're seeing a lot of shifts as far as like formatting of like services. So I think that's just kind of like the new thing, is that there's going to be changes and shifts, and as students are going into the workforce, just to be adaptable and flexible. All right, so let me go ahead and I'm going to close the student Q&A because I do want there to be some time for you all to network. But before we get to that point, the Ubisoft team has some resources that they want to share with you all. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them.
Hello. Yes, first and foremost, a little video that's just who we are as a company. It's what's called a sizzle reel. So yeah, so that's just a little intro to who we are as a company, the experience. As far as us in terms of numbers, the video had 17,000. That number is now actually up to over 20,000 employees in over 45 studios around the world. So a very wide range of opportunities, locations, experiences. As was probably obvious when we were trying to give broad answers about all of the different career paths in gaming. It's a huge industry and very diverse in terms of the job experience, the people, and the needs. And similarly on the next slide, have just a very, very broad view to give you a sense of the scale. So our worldwide presence, we have obviously the San Francisco office being the closest to San Jose State, which is both a studio and a business office, and then locations around the world supporting both the business and the game development sides. So there's a lot more to it than just the four of us you see in front of you. And if you didn't recognize the game titles in the video offhand, on the next slide, we have just a few of the different games that are in our portfolio. So Rainbow Six Siege in the top row that we had mentioned is the biggest eSports presence, but many others really covering a wide range of audiences, platforms that they're played on, and the types of games that we are producing and bringing to the world. So that's just a really broad sweep of who Ubisoft is as a company, just to give you a bit of a high level.